I work on Qt. That kind of makes your life easier. However, Qt is rather big, and there's a lot of things you need to know. So life is not so easy. But today, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks. All of them, except for one very minor thing, can be done in Qt 4.4x. If I get a chance to run any of the examples, they'll all be running against 4.4.3 today. If you're attending this at Qt Developer Days, you'll be getting a zip file with this. If you're watching it as a video, you'll have to root around on our webpage to find out where it is. But the basic things I want to kind of go over today are giving your apps a memory, pulling text off your labels, converting text from one format to multiple formats, making your app know the local customs of the operating system, easily storing your file name in the window title, how to invoke a slot without a signal, and if we still have a lot of time at the end, I'm going to go into some more involved examples that show how to brighten your text edit and how to make your dialogues dance and your panels fade. If we don't get to it, it's okay. It's already included in the source code. But before I go further, I thought I would talk a little bit about how to find out about all these little tips and tricks that I've talked about. Because all the things I'm going to talk about today are going to be focused on things you can do with your app, things that are just standard API that is available in Qt and that you might not know about. And also, I'm not going to focus too much on graphical splash and things. I'm just going to focus on things that you can do that make your app just kind of a more pleasurable experience. So, first of all, some of the places you can go to find out about these things. The first is the Trolltech Lab blogs, and this is of course available at labs.trolltech.com. Now, we're a bunch of developers here, and there's not so many times we get to speak in the spotlight, except for like maybe today. So we like to go and kind of brag about things that we've done, and going to the blogs is a great place to find out about this stuff. And a lot of times you'll find out about things before they're even part of Qt, and it might even be available as a project. You can try it out, see how it works, and give us feedback. But there's lots of little tricks that end up showing up there. Now, another place you can go to look for things is the What's New in Qt section for every new Qt minor release. So this is done by the documentation team, and what they try to do is get together and form a big list of all the things that have changed from Qt 4.3 to Qt 4.4, for example. And you can use this to kind of figure out what's the new stuff in Qt. It's pretty handy, especially if you want the high-level overview. Now, another place you can look for things are the Qt Quarterly articles. Now, I don't know if you read Qt Quarterly. If you're a Qt customer, you already get Qt Quarterly as part of the cost of your Qt license. But these are usually articles that are written by developers, either inside of Qt software or externally, that talk about how they use Qt or new features that you can use in Qt. And it's really very handy. It's a very short read. It's like 12 pages. You can get through it. It's a great little thing to read. And then last but not least, there is the changelog. Now, the changelog is something that I don't know if everybody reads, but it's actually something that is a very good thing to take a look at. Whenever we are doing a new release of Qt, whether it is a patch release or a minor release or even a whole brand new version, usually the release manager will come around and tell us that, hey, it's time to write the release or the changelog. Go in and look through all your changes and try to explain what those changes are to make sense to users. And we're like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, we'll do it. And then we, go do other things, and usually, by the third or fourth time of the release manager going around, we manage to get the whole changelog in. And the changelog is very good because you can find out things that might have been fixed, regressions that might have been fixed, or new features that might have been added if you're in a minor release that are maybe not as big as the changes that are warranted for the What's New in Qt page. So it's a nice way to find out about little changes in Qt. And now that we even store the change or the task tracking number, you can actually see if your bug has been fixed. And the final place you can go to figure out about this stuff is go into Ask the Community. Now, I've listed 3 places here that you can go to, the qtcenter.org, or you can ask on the Qt interest mailing list, or you can go to the #Qt IRC channel on Freenode. I'm sure there are other places. I just don't know them all. So, feel free to send in your best places to go to ask the community. So now that I've gone through that, let's take a look at one of the first tips I have, which is giving your app a memory. Now, this is probably one of the simplest things you can do for your app that really makes a big difference for users using it. I have used apps from time to time that you load it up and there's certain things that you end up having to type over and over again, or things you have to select over and over again, and it's really annoying, and you kind of wish that the app would at least remember these things. So what are you going to do? Luckily, inside of Qt, we have a class called QSettings, which really works for the majority of your cases. Unless you have really, really large files that you want to store, that might not be the best, QSettings might not be the best thing for it. But QSettings is a great way to store a value that you can save and read back and will apply to your settings or apply to your application. And it has a hierarchy. It will save it for application-wide settings versus company-wide settings versus settings just for you. So it's a very handy class, and I hope everybody knows about it and uses it. That's not the big tip right now, but the one tip I want to talk about is something that you may not be aware of, and that's setting the window geometry. Now, I don't know how many of you guys have written code to save and restore the geometry of an application, but it's not something that's really simple to do. And for many years inside of Qt, we had this nice document that explained all the things you needed to do to save the geometry, because it was different on different platforms. Certain things didn't happen in a different way, so you should try it this way versus this way, and it might work, or but there would probably be some way that would always break. And we were for a long time just gave that as an application developer's problem, not something that we would fix in Qt. However, back in Qt 4.2, we introduced a new function, and that function is called QWidget Save Geometry. And on the source code, you can see in the slide here, it's rather simple to use. You simply, in your close event, which is probably the best place to save your geometry because the window hasn't been closed yet, you simply create a QSettings object, and you set a value. So here we're setting the myWidget geometry key to basically the save geometry function. The save geometry function basically will return a Q byte array that stores in all the information you need to know about how to save the geometry for a widget. And this is very handy. And then once you've saved the geometry, you can go ahead and do whatever sort of other processing you want to do. In this case, we're just calling the standard QWidget close event. And restoring geometry is not that much more difficult. You simply create another QSettings object. You pull the byte array out, just like just to have it, and then you just call restore geometry, and that will restore the size and the position of the window. It will also have some knowledge as to which screen it was on, so you should get the proper behavior that you want. Now, there's another function that's existed for a while in QMain window called QMain window save state and QMain window restore state. Now these do not touch the geometry of the window. However, they are useful for saving the toolbar and dock widget position in your main window, and which ones are closed and which ones are opened. So it's used very similar to how you save and restore geometry. It returns a qbyte array that you can write into QSettings, and you just feed in a qbyte array to the restore state. So that's another way that you can save and restore geometry, save and restore your main window settings. Basically giving your application a memory. And it's something that you should just, that's very easy to do. Go through your app, find things that you're like, I could save this, I could remember this, and make it easier for people using it later. And, make your app, so much better. Now, I want to talk about converting text into multiple formats. You may or may not know, but Qt actually has a lot of ways of taking the text that you have in a QTextEdit or a QText document and converting your text into a PDF, or converting it into HTML, or converting it into an SVG. So I'm going to show you the ways to do it, and it's actually very simple recipes to do this. So let's first take a look at HTML, which is probably the simplest way to do it. You start with a QString, and basically you start with your text document, and you call toHTML on it, and you add what encoding you kind of want it to be in. I mean, QString is a Unicode-based string, but eventually you're going to be writing it to a file, and you probably aren't going to be writing Unicode 16 to it. Then simply create a Q file, open it, and then call toUTF-8 and write it to a file. That's it. That's all you need to do to convert it to HTML. Similarly, creating a PDF of your document is very simple to do as well. Simply create a QPrinter, set the output format to PDF format, set the file name you want to save it to, and then simply get your text document and call print on it, passing the printer. This will create a PDF document for you. Also, if you're one of those old school people that like to use PostScript, PostScript also works exactly the same way. You just, instead of passing PDF format, you pass PostScript format. Scalable vector graphics. You might not have known this, but it's very easy to make your document into an SVG. Start with the SVG generator class, create a generator, give it an output file name, give it a size. It's important to give it a size. I set the resolution, you don't necessarily have to. Then create a QPainter on your SVG generator. Again, get your document out of your text edit and call draw contents and pass it the painter. It's that simple to create an SVG. Now, this is the one thing that is a 4.5 feature, but since it was pretty much in line with everything else that I was talking about, I figured I would talk about it here. For 4.5, we've added a QText document writer, and the first version of it includes using the ODF file format. So you can now create an ODF output file. Again, it's very simple. Create a QText document writer, set the format, set the file name, and then call write, passing your text document. It's that simple. Now, I want to talk about how you can pull text off your labels. And you might be wondering why you would even be doing this. I mean, a label is read-only text. There's really no reason why somebody would want to select the text and copy off of it, right? Well, I don't know how many of you guys do support for your applications, but many times you might end up doing, trying the best you can to avoid getting some sort of message box up But at some point there's just a pure failure, and you have to put up a message box that talks about, what went wrong. And, sometimes you have some extra information that you tell that, that might be useful for technical support. However, technical support ends up getting a picture of the message box instead of the actual text that's on the message box. And it's much easier to have the text because, I'm kind of a lazy person when I'm dealing with text, and I know that I always end up adding a typo. So if I can select the text, copy it, and paste it in, I know I won't mess it up. So here's a perfect example in a message box where you would want to take the text and select it and copy it and put it into some sort of web form or message to explain what's going wrong. Well, you've been able to do this now for a while in Qt, and the best way to do it is use the set text interaction flags on your label. So in this very simple example, we take the text interaction flags that are currently on the label and or in the value Qt text selectable by mouse. And after enabling that, you can now select and copy your text. There are a lot of other functions that you can use, or rather, a lot of other flags that go along with these text interaction flags. You can even make your label into sort of a mini web browser if you really felt like it. So feel free to check them out if you want them, for example, to be able to click on a link and have that take you to a web page. This is the perfect place to do it. So we've gone through several of the tips already. What I want to talk to you now about is making your apps follow local customs. Now Qt is a cross-platform toolkit, and in general we try our best to make sure that when you recompile your app, things will work just perfectly on each platform. However, sometimes there are things that we can't do automatically, and we need your help we need a little bit of help, some hints from you to be able to do things correctly. And we still have some work to be done, but I think we've come a lot closer to making your apps follow the local customs of your operating system without you having to do anything. And I'll just say up front, I'm not going to talk about using locale and making sure that you have the decimal points and commas in the right place. Use QLocale for that. That's what it's for. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is something that you may not be aware of, but something that people who use a platform know about is the position of text and how things are laid out in a dialog. So this is an example of a KDE dialog and a GNOME dialog, or rather an example of how they're laid out in KDE and GNOME. Now, I don't know how quickly you guys can spot the differences, but I'll just quickly point them out. The first is the alignment of the text labels. And the other thing to be aware of is how the buttons are lined up. In the first set, we have reset, submit, bug report, don't submit. And in the GNOME set, we have reset, don't submit, and submit bug report. You'll also notice, if you're keeping close score, that the combo boxes actually have different sizes as well. One is stretched and one isn't. Now you might think this is maybe just a KDE and GNOME thing, but I assure you, the same problem exists on Mac OS X and Windows. The alignment is different, and the position of the buttons is different. So, what you can use is QForm layout. Now QForm layout was a class that we actually added from embedded software, and that was to work on cases where you've created a dialog, but the dialog is you might be ending up on different screen sizes, and QForm layout would help you squeeze and move these labels over so that everything remained on screen. It was a very handy class, but it can also be used to figure out the alignment of things on your platform or on the desktop platform. So here's an example where we create a Q form layout, and we just add a row, giving it the name of the label we want and the widget that we want to go with it. So in this case, we're passing the name edit, then we add company in the company edit, and then we add a phone and a phone edit, and so on and so forth. And as you can see, it will realign everything for us and set it up correctly. Now the other part of this is something called QDialog button box. Now Q form layout was added as part of Qt 4.4. QDialog button box was added much earlier in Qt 4.2, and it's got a very simple way of working. It works on the idea that each button in a dialog typically has a certain role a role associated with it. Some buttons will clear fields, other buttons will accept the dialog, others will reject. And it's typically in your the guidelines for your specific platform that they talk about, accept buttons should be on this side versus reject buttons here, and so on and so forth. So what we do here is we create our button box, and we can add our button. Again, we just add the text that we want in our button box, and we give it a role. And QButtonBox also has some extra signals that make it easier, so you don't have to keep track of the actual buttons. And once you do that, you'll see that your widgets your buttons will be placed in the right position at runtime on the platform. So that's the first thing to look at: Q form layout and QDialog button box. Now, there's another thing that you might want to think about, and that's the idea of shortcuts. And if you ever develop on one platform, you might think the idea of shortcuts is not something that you really need to worry about at all, because the shortcuts, they should be known by everyone, right? So if you take a shortcut for select all, and you probably go around and find a Mac developer, a Windows developer, an X11 developer, and ask them, what's the keyboard shortcut for select all? You'll probably get everyone saying it's Control A. And you're like, okay, well, good enough. How about we ask about undo? What's the keyboard shortcut for doing the undo combination? And they'll be like, well, it's Control Z. Yeah, so you're like, okay, now we're in good shape. Well, let's talk about redo. And depending on who you talk to, you'll get some people saying that it's Control plus Shift plus Z, and others will be talking about being at Control plus Y. And there'll be others that say, no, it's both, whichever one you want to hit. And you're like, okay, well, I guess I can maybe code for that. And then what about help? And you ask a majority of people, and they'll probably say F1. But if you talk to the people on Mac OS X, they'll say the standard shortcut key is Control Shift and question mark. So, and even one more, just to make it even more, adding a tab in a web browser or something like that. Some say it'll be Control T, and others will say it's Shift and Control and T. So you have a lot of problems. And for a long time, the only way to make this really work was to have somebody that kind of knew about the platform and was willing to go in and add the extra if-defs that were needed to make the shortcut keys correct. Well, we kind of thought that this was a real problem, and especially it kind of hit us because every once in a while you'd end up with a shortcut key that you weren't used to on the platform. So the way that we solved this was using something called QKeySequence standard key. Now QKeySequence standard key is a feature that was added in 4.2, and it's basically a set of enumerations that follow the different keys for each platform. And what you do is you pass in the enumeration, and from there, at runtime, we'll figure out which platform you're on and what sort of key combinations you want to use. Now, one thing you'll see here is there's set shortcuts and not set shortcut. You can call set shortcut if you want. What set shortcuts will do is it will add all the key combinations that match with that. So if you have people on a certain platform that expect to have 2 sets of keys, for example on Windows, there's for pasting text you have Control V and you also have Shift and Insert. So some people want to have both key combinations, and using set shortcuts will do that. However, it will only show the primary one first. Now you can go inside of our Q key sequence documentation and take a look at the keys that we've already defined. If you think that we should define more, please let us know. We're always interested in getting, a good coverage of all the shortcut keys. But basically, in your action, set your shortcut key to match one of these enums, and Q key sequence will take care of the rest. Also, in case you just want to know about what sort of key sequences you're going to be throwing into people, you can also ask the Q key sequence for its key bindings for one of these standard keys, and then you can print it out using the portable text version of toString. It's a handy way of getting these, in case you want to know, especially for documentation purposes. Now, one thing I want to talk to you about is something that has been around in Qt for a while, but it's something that we fixed now in this last version of Qt, and that was adding some sort of logic for setting the file name or the file path on a window. Now, if you look at a lot of source code examples that we have in Qt for text editors and stuff, you'll see that there will be code, or rather document-based applications. You'll see there will be code where we go and we call something like this, where we call get save file name, and then we figure out if we have a file name or not. We change it over to be something like untitled, and then we do a whole bunch of work to get the name down to a manageable level. But we have a new function now called set Windows file path, and set Windows file path simplifies your code. This is the final code. You simply call this is for example, we're asking for a name up front for a file. And we, get the save file name. If there is no name, we create our own, and then we call set window file path. Now, set window file path will do several things for you. The first thing it will do is it will take care of the path. So let's say you have some nice long path like this. We'll get rid of that and bring it down to just the file name. So that's kind of handy. The other thing that you have is on Mac OS X, you will get the proxy icon, and maybe you don't know what the proxy icons are, but if you are on Mac OS X, you'll be happy to have them, and you can look it up in the Mac OS X user interface guidelines and find out how they can be used. They're a very handy thing. And the final thing is that it will also handle the modified state. So let's say so this is again on Mac OS X, but it doesn't matter what platform you're on. Here, this is the normal dialog, but after you've modified something, you'll see that you get the extra little dot in the corner. And on Windows and X11, you'll get a little plus to indicate, or a little asterisk to indicate that the thing has been modified when you mark the window being modified. So that's a nice feature to have. So please go out and use it. Q window or Q widget set window file path. So one of the last things I want to talk about before I go into the advanced features is how to invoke a slot without a signal. Now, I'm guessing everybody here in the audience would know about a signal and a slot connection, and that when a signal is emitted, the slot will be emitted afterwards. Now, sometimes there might be reasons you want to just invoke a slot without having a signal to signal it. Well, the first one is there's a really obvious and simple way of doing it, which is just calling that function, calling the slot. A slot is nothing more than a C++ method. You can just call it and it will do what it needs to do. However, there might be cases where you actually want to call a slot that you don't want to necessarily call it right now. You want to call it in a little bit. And a great way of solving that is using something called QTimer single shot. Now QTimer single shot works great for doing, basically it will just fire a timer off and it will attach itself to a slot if you want. So a slot that has no arguments. But you might end up having some sort of crazy object that has a set like this, a signature like this, where you have two arguments that you need to pass to the slot. And this is something that QTimer single shot will not be able to handle without you adding some extra code. So, how do you deal with that? Well, we have something called QMetaObject Invoke Meta Method. And this one is rather simple to use, especially for the case where you want to just use something that's very similar to QTimer single shot. You create the object, you say what sort of method you want to call, and then you can say what type of connection you want to do. By default, it'll be a direct connection or an auto connection, which means it will be direct on if they're on the same thread, or queued if they're on separate threads. And down below is an example of how you would invoke sort of the function that we had before that had multiple arguments. So this is one that has where we created the object, the name of the method we want to call, the type of connection, then we have the type of return argument and the various arguments. And these will be marshaled and taken care of, and you can basically invoke methods that take multiple arguments. It can be a handy thing to do if you're in a situation where you need to do that. So I've talked about, basically gone through the simple things that need to happen. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the advanced issues. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is brightening your text edit. And basically what I'm saying is we start with, this is something that you probably see in most of your instant messaging applications. And that's where you take a smiley that you type in, and the application goes and changes it for you into some sort of image. And you can load in your custom images and stuff like that. And you can have some fun. So I'm going to show you the very basics you need to do to be able to do that. And that's in this code. Right. So in this example here, I have, this is the class I have. And there's several things that you need to know about for this class. So I've created a class called smileyTextEdit. And the basics of it are a slot called append_drawText and the private implementation of it. And the private implementation is dependent on two structures that I've created up here. One called smileyRange, which includes the position and length of the smiley that somebody has typed in. And also an operator so I can sort them. And it also has a link to the resource inside the QTextEdit for getting the graphic out. And then I have a smiley info, which talks about, which links to the file name and the resource inside the text document. So this is rather straightforward. Again, this is all documented out, so feel free to find the code and look at the information yourself. In the beginning, I just make it read-only because in this case, all I want to do is just substitute text that's written in already and sent that isn't editable. Here, I am creating a map that goes through all the different smileys that I've created. So you can see here I open up a SVG and I insert one for the smiley faces, one for the crying faces, ones for the super smile, so on and so forth. And I'm basically just creating these, and this is, you could of course make this a more, something that's editable by the user. Again, this is more initialization code for initializing the smileys. Once I've initialized my map, I get the current font for the text edit, and I get the font metrics of it. So that's talking about, the size, the width and the height of a letter in this font. And I get the height of it, and I create a square image for this. And then I walk through the smileys that I just created above, and I do an SVG. Since I'm using SVGs for this, I'm just rendering an SVG into the image using that size. And I add this image that I just created as a resource into the document. Then this, of course, is the simple function for adding text. So the first thing I do is make sure that my smileys have been initialized. I then create a text cursor for the document, and I move the text cursor to the end. It makes more sense to create the text cursor from scratch than to pull out the text cursor that's in the document, because you want to do your own additions. I then call begin edit block to start the thing. Then I have a function called locate all smileys. And this will, we can take a quick look at it. It's a very simple function. All this does is we take our hash of smileys that we created before, and we walk through the text and we look for every place we see a certain smiley. And when we see that, we put in the range or the spot where it happened and how long that particular smiley is. Is it a 2-character, is it a 3-character, is it a 4-character smiley? And then we just mark that spot, and once we've gone through and found all the smileys, it might be in a completely different order than how we actually looked for it. We sort the list of smileys by their position in the text, and then we return the string for it. So that's how locate smileys works. Once we've got our list of ranges here that we got from locate smileys, it's just a matter of walking through the list and finding the position in the text where we had the smileys, and then inserting our image instead, and then skipping over the text that was inserted. And at the end, we make sure that we insert any extra text that might have been missed, and we finish up our insertion. And that is basically all there is to it. And once you've done that, you'll get a nice little program like this. Well, this is just a quick example, so if I say, hello, no, you don't have a smiley, hello there. You'll see you get the, up on the top you'll have the fixed version with the smiley on it. So, like, yay. And yeah, it's pretty simple, pretty easy to use. So, that was that example. Let's bring this back. And actually, the next slide I'll just go to is exactly the same. It's talking about making your pages fade. So I will first do an example of that. So let's actually run this example first so you can see what it's like. So here's a very simple example. This is like kind of an example to choose what sort of dessert you want and the amount. And at this particular restaurant, you have one thing you have cake, ice cream, or fruit. If you choose cake, you just have a certain amount. If you choose ice cream, you'll see that our dialog expands, and you can choose between what sort of things you want to put on it and the different amount. And if you choose fruit, you can choose what you want to do here. And as you can see, as I switch between ice cream and fruit, you see that the text, or the two screens, kind of fade into each other. So, this one is a bit more complex. So what I'll first focus on more is the example where we're switching the size of the dialog. And this one is not exactly simple. So, feel free to take a look at the code later. The first thing we'll take a look at is, if possible, the dialog that we've actually created with this. So I'm just going to remove the widget box, and we'll take a look at the properties that are for this. Now this dialog doesn't look too different from anything that you probably know about. The only thing that might be a bit surprising is that if we resize it, you'll see that we have inside of here a QStacked widget. And the key thing that we've done with this QStacked widget is that we've set the size policy to ignored for vertical. Now this is important because what it means is that when you set a widget size policy to be ignored, what it means is that when a layout is figuring out its size, it doesn't have to figure out, or the size of that widget is not included in the size of the final layout. So that's the first thing you have to do. And as you can see, even in edit mode here, you'll see that like I can scrunch it down very small. It's not including the size of the stacked widget at all in the size of the entire widget. So after we do that, in our subclass, after we've set up the UI, and I've created a couple of button groups that are useful for setting things up. I also, we'll deal with the fading in a bit, but I also set up some stuff for fading. But this is the work that we use for making sure that everything works out correctly. What I do is I first start with, basically what I want to do is I want to have the size hints saved for the case where the widget is at its largest. And then I want to move it back to where the widget was before. So I first say I want to use ice cream, which is of course the biggest section of our example. If you remember, I'll just run it real quick again. You can see that ice cream is the biggest one of this, and cake is the smallest. Fruit is in between. But, so what I need to do to make that work is I first say, before I've actually shown the widget, I say, change the thing to ice cream. And inside my chosen function, what I do, besides setting up some other things, is I activate the layout, and then I call adjust size on it. And what this does is it will activate the layout and make it start computing its size hints and various things like that. And calling adjust size will make sure that it's fixed to the exact size you want. And then I call set fixed sized on it. Now the reason I call adjust size in it is that it will eventually call and activate is that it will eventually call the size hint, which down here I pull the size hint from before, and I saved my cached size, which was the first thing for the ice cream. And what I do here is I get the size policy, I switch it to a preferred size policy instead of the ignored size policy. I then call size hint, which will get me the size hint of that widget with the fully expanded, and then I set the other size policy back so then it's not figured out. And then when I'm doing my own size hint, I get the size hint for the dialog, I check which current pane is being shown. Is it the cake pane? Is it the ice cream pane? Or is it the fruit pane? And if it's either the fruit or the ice cream pane, I adjust the final size for the size hint to be bigger to include the size of the widget when it was fully expanded. And I return that. And that's the basics you need to do. The other thing, of course, you need to do is you want to do an animation. Now, this is not using the forthcoming animation API, but it's something that you can use now to do certain animations on Windows. So the first thing we'll do, so basically we could, of course, just set the size ourselves and it will just jump to the new size. But that's kind of course, a bit boring. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll create a timeline using QTimeline. And we want this timeline to go for, about 1/3 of a second. And whenever the timeline will fire, we'll call our slot animated resize. Now QTimeline works by figuring out, on the curve where it is in its time and what frames it should be drawing. And this is very handy if you just want to call your timeline and just have it do what it needs to do and not think about what exact spot you should be doing, which can happen when you're using a QTimer because the timer might fire late. So we call our animated resize function, and basically we check to see if our frame, the frame that's passed to us, if that equals the height for our widget. If it does, we set our fixed size to that. Otherwise, we just resize the height, going up or down. And one nice thing that's good about QTimeline here is that you can set the frame range to be from 0 to 1, or from one number to another, and it doesn't care if it's higher or lower. It will know what to do and count up or count down respectively. And then we call it, or then we start our timeline, which will then start firing and then dealing with things. And we then adjust our maximum height or minimum height depending on where we want to go. And the main reason we do this is so that we don't get a resize handle, because in this case we want to resize the widget ourselves. And again, as you can see, what we get is something that just resizes perfectly for the things you want to show. Now let's talk a little bit about how you can do fading. And this is mostly handled in the fading widget. The fader widget is a very simple widget. Again, there's just a couple of parts to it. It has a timeline, a brush, and a pix map, and a duration for how long it should go. And you can give it a fade brush and the duration. And its implementation is rather simple. At the beginning, we pass in a pix map of, can potentially pass in a pix map of the thing that we want to fade from, and we give it a parent for the thing that we want it to fade it to, basically. Then, again, we create a timeline, giving it about 1/3 of a second. We set the range here from 1000 to 0 to kind of have it fade out. And again, when the frame is changed, we call update. Now, update will generate a paint event for our widget. So, going down to the paint event, we simply create a painter for the widget. We figure out what frame we are inside the widget, or inside our timeline. We get the opacity for our painter, and we set the opacity. So what this means is that the opacity is going to be first opaque, because the top value is 1000, and an opacity value of 1.0 basically means that it's opaque. And as we keep on going, we'll get down to 0, which means it'll be completely transparent. So using QPainter set opacity is a nice, easy way of making your widget start to fade. We fill a rect with the start brush, which could be the initial image, and then we draw our pix map. And again, if our frames if we're down to 1 or less, there's no point in doing anything else, so we call close on the widget, which will also delete the widget. So that's the class, and then using the fader widget is very simple. moment. So again, when the tab widget changes, we call our fade-in widget function. And the fade-in widget function is very simple. We check if we have a fader widget already. We call close on it, which will delete the widget. Then we create a new fader widget and pass in a snapshot, which is basically just a shot that we've taken of the current widget, which you get right here in our grab widget. And then we and then we pass the other widget that we're going to be fading to. And then we just start our fade. And as you can see, we just get a nice fade in between. If you want a longer fade, you can up the time. If you want a shorter fade, you can lower the time. The nice thing is that even though you can keep the steps and it will know how many steps it can skip to get to what you need. Oopsie. One moment. So, we've seen some tips that we can use, and we've seen some tricks that you can use when you're creating your widgets. Tips are like using the settings, using things like QForm layout. Tricks are invoking a slot without a signal. And I hope that I've given you some context of places you could use these signals and slots. I encourage you to take a look at the source code package that I've made up for this presentation. It's very useful. And I hope that you can take some of this stuff and apply it into the applications that you're writing today. Thank you very much.